Elena Rodriguez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she looked at the strange purple flowers growing near the riverbank. She had been studying plants on New Dakota for 3 years now, but these flowers were something new. The planet always surprised her with its weird plants and animals. She picked up her scanner and pointed it at the purple blooms. The device beeped softly as it recorded the flower's DNA patterns. New Dakota was not like Earth. It had 2 moons that danced around each other in the sky. When both moons lined up just right, they pulled at the planet's waters like invisible hands. Most of the time this made pretty tides, but sometimes it made big problems. Elena knew this, but she loved her work too much to worry about moon cycles. The research station where Elena worked sat on a hill near the Cheyenne River. Below the hill was the Lakota Preserve where the Sioux people lived. They had come to New Dakota 50 years ago when Earth got too crowded. The Sioux brought their old ways with them but learned to live on this new world. Elena respected them but did not know them well. She was too busy with her plants and research. Elena's communication device started making loud beeping sounds. She looked at the small screen and saw red warning letters flashing. The message was from Central Command in the main colony. She pressed the button to hear the message. Attention all personnel in sectors 7 through 12. Emergency flood warning in effect. Both moons will align in 6 hours. Computer models show water levels will rise 20 feet above normal. All research stations must evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Elena looked up at the sky. The 2 moons were getting closer to each other. She could see them both even though it was still daytime. The bigger moon looked like a white marble and the smaller one looked like a silver coin. When they lined up like this, the Sioux called it the time of angry waters. She packed her equipment quickly. Her hoverpod was parked near the station. The small flying vehicle could carry her and her gear back to the main colony in 30 minutes. Elena loaded her plant samples and research notes into the pod's storage area. She wanted to save all her work. As Elena prepared to leave, she heard voices down by the river. She looked through her binoculars and saw 2 small figures near the water. They looked like children. Elena zoomed in and saw 2 young Sioux boys playing by the riverbank. They were throwing stones into the water and laughing. Elena checked her watch. The evacuation boats for the Lakota Preserve had left an hour ago. These boys should not be here. Maybe they got lost or left behind. The water was already rising. Elena could see the river was higher than it had been that morning. She tried to call the boys, but they were too far away to hear her voice. Elena got into her hoverpod and flew down toward the river. As she got closer, she could see the boys more clearly. One looked about 8 years old and the other about 10. They wore traditional Sioux clothing mixed with modern fabric. The older boy had a small backpack. Elena landed her pod on the riverbank near the boys. They looked up at her with surprise and fear. The older boy grabbed his brother's hand and stepped back. Elena knew some Sioux families did not trust outsiders. She raised her hands to show she meant no harm. "Hello," Elena said in a gentle voice. "I am Elena. Are you supposed to be here? The river is going to get very high soon." The older boy spoke to his brother in the Sioux language. Then he looked at Elena and said, "I am Little Wolf. This is my brother Running Bear. Our group left, but we were playing and did not hear them call us." Elena's heart sank. These boys were in real danger. The flood would come fast when the moons aligned. She looked at her communication device. She had messages from her supervisor telling her to return to base immediately. "You need to come with me," Elena told the boys. "The water will rise very high. We must go to safety now." Little Wolf shook his head. "We wait for our brother Daniel. He comes for us." Elena looked at the rising water. Small waves were already washing over rocks that had been dry an hour ago. The current was getting stronger too. She could see branches and debris floating downstream. "There is no time to wait," Elena said. "The water rises too fast. Your brother will look for you at the safe place." Running Bear said something to Little Wolf in their language. The younger boy looked scared now. He pointed at the water and spoke quickly. Little Wolf nodded and looked worried. "Running Bear says the water spirits are angry," Little Wolf translated. "He says we should go." Elena felt relieved. Maybe she could get the boys to safety before the worst flooding started. She opened the door to her hoverpod. The vehicle was small but could hold 3 people if they squeezed together. "Get in quickly," Elena said. "We fly to the safe place." But as the boys walked toward the pod, the ground under their feet started to shake. Elena looked upstream and saw a wall of brown water rushing toward them. The main flood was coming early. The moons must have aligned faster than the computers predicted. "Run!" Elena shouted. The boys ran toward higher ground, but the water moved faster than they could run. Elena started her hoverpod, but the engine made strange noises. She tried again, and it started properly. She flew the pod toward the boys, but the rushing water reached them first. Little Wolf and Running Bear were swept onto a small island in the middle of the river. The island was really just a pile of rocks with some trees growing on it. Elena could see the boys clinging to a tree trunk as water swirled around them. Elena flew her pod over the island but could not land safely. The surface was too rocky and uneven. She hovered above the boys and lowered a rope ladder from her emergency kit. But the wind from the pod's engines was too strong. It kept pushing the boys away from the ladder. The water around the island was rising fast. Soon the boys' small refuge would be underwater. Elena had to make a choice. She could fly back to safety and call for help, but the boys would probably drown before help arrived. Or she could try to land on the unstable island and risk all their lives. Elena looked at the scared faces of Little Wolf and Running Bear. They were just children. She could not abandon them. She had to try to save them, even if it meant putting herself in danger. Elena brought her hoverpod down carefully toward the island. The landing gear touched the rocks and the pod bounced hard. Alarms started beeping inside the cockpit. Elena ignored them and kept trying to land. Finally, the pod settled on the uneven ground. "Come quickly," she called to the boys. Little Wolf and Running Bear ran toward the pod through the rising water. Just as they reached the vehicle, Elena heard a loud crack. One of the pod's landing struts had broken on the rough rocks. Warning lights flashed on her control panel. The boys climbed into the pod and Elena tried to take off, but the damaged landing gear caught on the rocks. The pod lurched sideways and more alarms sounded. Elena tried the engines again, but they were making terrible grinding noises. Elena looked at her instruments. The hoverpod was badly damaged. They were not going anywhere. The three of them were now trapped on the small island as the floodwaters continued to rise around them. Elena stared at the broken control panel of her hoverpod. Red warning lights flashed and strange beeping sounds filled the small cabin. The left landing strut had snapped when they landed on the rocky island. Now the pod tilted at a dangerous angle and would not fly. Little Wolf and Running Bear sat quietly in the back seats. Their eyes were wide with fear as they watched the brown floodwater swirl around their tiny island. The water had risen 2 feet since Elena landed the pod. What had been a small hill of rocks was now just a few square yards of dry ground. "The pod is broken," Elena told the boys. She tried to keep her voice calm, but inside she felt panic growing. "We cannot fly away." Little Wolf translated her words to Running Bear in the Sioux language. The younger boy started to cry softly. Little Wolf put his arm around his brother and spoke gentle words to comfort him. Elena looked at her emergency radio. She pressed the talk button and spoke into the microphone. "Research Station 7 to Central Command, emergency. My hoverpod is damaged on an island in the Cheyenne River. I have 2 civilian children with me. We need immediate rescue." Static crackled from the radio speaker. Then a voice came through, but it was broken and hard to understand. "Research Station 7 cannot. Storm interference. Rescue teams. When conditions..." Elena tried again but got only static. The storm was interfering with radio signals. Even if her message got through, no rescue team could reach them in these conditions. The wind was getting stronger and rain had started to fall. Elena opened the pod's emergency kit. Inside she found some food bars, a first aid kit, emergency blankets, and a length of rope. There was also a small inflatable raft, but it looked too small and fragile for the rushing water around them. "We need to leave the pod," Elena said. "The water will cover this island soon." Little Wolf looked scared. "Where do we go?" "The water is everywhere." Elena pointed to a hill about a quarter-mile downstream. Through the rain and wind, she could see trees and rocks that were still above the floodline. "We swim to that hill." "Running Bear cannot swim well," Little Wolf said. "The water is too fast and cold." Elena studied the raging river. Logs and debris rushed past their island like fast-moving trains. The current would sweep them away before they could swim 50 yards. But staying on the island meant certain death when the water rose higher. Elena noticed a large fallen tree floating toward them. The tree trunk was thick and long with many branches still attached. If they could grab onto it, the tree might carry them downstream toward higher ground. "When that tree comes close, we jump onto it," Elena said. Hold tight to the branches and let it carry us down the river. Little, Wolf translated for Running Bear. The younger boy shook his head and spoke rapidly in Sioux. Little Wolf looked worried as he listened to his brother. Running. Bear says the tree spirits will be angry if we steal their tree, Little Wolf explained. He says we should ask permission first. Elena watched the tree floating closer. They had only minutes before it passed their island. She did not understand the Sioux beliefs about tree spirits, but she respected the boy's culture. Ask the tree spirits for help, Elena said quickly. Tell them we need to borrow their tree to save our lives. Little Wolf spoke in Sioux to the approaching tree. His words were swept away by the wind, but he spoke with respect and urgency. Running Bear joined in, and both boys made gestures with their hands toward the floating trunk. The tree trunk bumped against the rocks at the edge of their island. Elena grabbed the emergency rope from her kit and tied one end around her waist. She tied the other end around Little Wolf. Hold on to your brother, Elena told Little Wolf. Do not let go, no matter what happens. Elena waded into the cold water and grabbed a thick branch on the tree trunk. The current immediately tried to pull her away from the island, but she held tight. Little Wolf followed her into the water with Running Bear clinging to his back. The moment they left the island, the river current grabbed them like a giant hand. The tree trunk spun and rolled in the rushing water. Elena held onto her branch with both hands while the boys clung to branches near her. Cold water splashed over their heads and filled their mouths. Elena could barely see through the rain and spray. The tree trunk moved faster than she expected. They rushed past the flooded research station where she had worked that morning. The building was already half underwater. A large log crashed into their tree trunk and nearly knocked Elena loose. She tightened her grip and checked on the boys. Little Wolf still held onto his branch, but Running Bear looked weak and scared. The cold water was sapping his strength. Elena tried to steer the tree trunk toward the shore, but the current was too strong. They rushed past the hill she had planned to reach. Now they were heading toward a section of river she did not know well. Through the rain she could see more hills ahead, but they were still far away. Something sharp hit Elena's leg underwater. She looked down and saw a piece of metal debris floating past. The flood had picked up all kinds of dangerous objects from the valley. Broken buildings, vehicles, and machinery were all mixed in with the rushing water. Running Bear started to slip from his branch. His small hands could not hold on against the strong current. Little Wolf tried to help his brother but nearly lost his own grip in the process. Elena made a quick decision. She untied the rope from her waist and retied it around Running Bear. Now if the boy fell into the water, she could pull him back to the tree. But this meant Elena had no safety line for herself. The tree trunk hit a shallow area and spun violently. Elena was thrown into the water but managed to grab another branch. Her head went underwater and she swallowed muddy river water. When she surfaced, she saw Little Wolf still clinging to the tree, but Running Bear was gone. Elena looked around frantically and saw the rope trailing in the water. She pulled on it and felt weight at the other end. Running Bear's head appeared above the surface. He was unconscious but still breathing. Elena pulled him close and held him against the tree trunk. Ahead of them, the river split around a large boulder. Elena saw that the left channel led toward a wooded hill, while the right channel disappeared into a canyon. She had to get them into the left channel or they would be swept into unknown territory. Elena kicked her legs to push the tree trunk toward the left side of the river. Little Wolf helped by paddling with his free hand. Slowly the tree drifted toward the shore channel. Just before they reached the boulder, Elena saw a sandy beach at the base of the wooded hill. Elena kicked harder and managed to guide the tree trunk toward the beach. When they got close to shore, she let go of the tree and swam toward land while pulling Running Bear with the rope. Little Wolf followed them through the shallow water. They collapsed on the sandy beach as the tree trunk continued downstream without them. Running Bear was still unconscious, but his chest moved up and down with steady breathing. Elena checked his pulse and found it strong. The boy had fainted from cold and fear but seemed unhurt. Elena looked around at their new situation. They were on a narrow beach surrounded by steep hills covered with trees. The beach was only 20 feet wide and the water was still rising. Soon this beach would be underwater too. Elena saw a dark opening in the hillside above the beach. It looked like the entrance to a cave. Caves stayed dry during floods and would protect them from the cold rain. Elena gently shook Running Bear until he woke up. "We must climb to that cave," Elena told the boys. "The water will cover this beach soon." Little Wolf helped his brother stand up. Running Bear was weak and shivering but could walk. Elena gathered some floating branches from the water's edge. They would need wood for a fire inside the cave. The climb up to the cave was difficult. The hillside was steep and slippery from the rain. Elena went first to test each step. Then she helped the boys climb up behind her. Several times they almost slipped back down to the beach. When they reached the cave entrance, Elena peered inside. The cave was deeper than she expected and completely dry. The opening was wide enough for all three of them, but narrow enough to block most of the wind and rain. Elena made a small fire near the cave entrance using dry leaves and twigs she found inside. The boys sat close to the fire to warm themselves. Running Bear had stopped shivering but still looked pale and tired. Outside the cave, the storm continued to rage. Elena could hear the river rushing past below them. Through the cave entrance, she watched logs and debris floating past in the muddy water. Their little beach was now completely underwater. Elena checked her communication device, but it was dead. Water had gotten inside during their river journey. They had no way to call for help, and no one knew where they were. Elena looked at Little Wolf and Running Bear huddled by the small fire and realized they might be trapped in this cave for days. Elena watched the small fire flicker in the cave entrance as rain poured down outside. The storm showed no signs of stopping. Water dripped from the cave ceiling in several places, but the back of the cave stayed dry. She had moved the boys away from the dripping areas and built the fire where smoke could escape through the cave opening. Running Bear shivered despite sitting close to the fire. His clothes were still wet from their river journey and the cave was cold. Elena opened her emergency kit and found 2 thermal blankets. She wrapped one around each boy and kept them close to the fire. Little Wolf watched Elena with curious eyes. He had been taught to be careful around outsiders, but this woman had risked her life to save them. She could have flown away in her pod and left them on the island. Instead, she stayed and got trapped with them. "Why did you help us?" Little Wolf asked. "You do not know us." Elena poked the fire with a stick to make it burn brighter. "You needed help." "That is enough reason." Little Wolf translated her words to Running Bear in the Sioux language. The younger boy listened and then spoke softly to his brother. Little Wolf nodded and turned back to Elena. "Running Bear says you have a good spirit. He says the water spirits guided you to us." Elena smiled. She did not believe in spirits, but she respected the boys' beliefs. "Maybe they did. I am glad I found you." Elena counted their supplies. She had 4 food bars, 3 bottles of water, and some basic medical supplies. If they were careful, the food and water might last 2 days. But Elena hoped rescue teams would find them before then. Running Bear pointed at his leg and said something in Sioux. Elena looked and saw blood on his pants. During their escape on the tree trunk, something had cut his leg. Elena opened the first aid kit and found bandages and antiseptic. "Let me look at your leg," Elena said gently. Running Bear was scared and shook his head. Little Wolf spoke to his brother in their language for several minutes. Finally, Running Bear nodded and let Elena examine his leg. The cut was not deep, but it was dirty from the river water. Elena cleaned the wound carefully with antiseptic and wrapped it with a clean bandage. Running Bear winced during the cleaning but did not cry. "You are very brave," Elena told Running Bear. The boy did not understand her English, but he smiled when Little Wolf translated. Elena broke 1 food bar into 3 pieces and gave each boy a piece. She took a small piece for herself. They also shared 1 bottle of water. Elena knew they had to make their supplies last as long as possible. As they ate, Little Wolf told Elena about his family. "Our father is a teacher at the Lakota school. Our mother grows corn and beans like our ancestors did on Earth. Our older brother Daniel is a soldier. He protects the colony from dangerous animals." Elena listened with interest. She had lived near the Lakota Preserve for 3 years, but knew very little about the Sioux families there. Most of her contact with them had been brief and formal. "What about you?" Little Wolf asked. "Do you have family?" Elena thought about her parents back on Earth. She had not seen them for 3 years. "My family lives far away on Earth. I came here to study plants and animals." "Do you like the plants here?" Little Wolf asked. "Very much," Elena said. "New Dakota has many plants that do not exist anywhere else. I try to understand how they grow and what they need to survive." Running Bear spoke to Little Wolf in Sioux. The older boy listened and then turned to Elena. "Running Bear says he knows about plants, too. Our grandmother taught him which plants make good medicine." Elena looked at Running Bear with new respect. Maybe you can teach me about the medicine plants. Running Bear smiled and nodded. He pointed to Elena's arm where she had scraped it during their climb to the cave. Then he spoke to Little Wolf. Running Bear says there is a plant near the cave entrance that helps cuts heal faster. Little Wolf translated. He wants to get some for you. Elena looked toward the cave entrance where rain still fell heavily. It is too dangerous to go outside now, but thank you for wanting to help. The hours passed slowly. Elena kept the fire burning by feeding it small pieces of wood she found in the cave. The boys dozed fitfully wrapped in their thermal blankets. Elena stayed awake to watch for any sign that the storm was ending. During the night, Elena heard sounds outside the cave that worried her. There were splashing noises and what sounded like large animals moving through the water. New Dakota had some dangerous creatures that became aggressive during floods. Elena hoped nothing would try to enter their cave. When morning came, the rain had stopped, but water still rushed past below them. Elena looked out of the cave and saw the flood had risen even higher during the night. Trees that had been above water yesterday were now completely submerged. Elena tried her emergency radio again, but it remained dead. She took apart the device and found that water had damaged the internal circuits. Even if she could fix it, they had no way to replace the broken parts. Little Wolf woke up and stretched. "Is the flood going down?" he asked hopefully. Elena shook her head. "Not yet. We must wait longer." Running Bear woke up and immediately checked his bandaged leg. The wound looked better this morning. Elena changed the bandage and was pleased to see no signs of infection. For breakfast, they shared another food bar and some water. Elena noticed both boys were still hungry after eating, but she knew they had to save food in case rescue took several days. Little Wolf taught Elena some words in the Sioux language. He pointed to different objects in the cave and said their names in Sioux. Elena repeated the words and Little Wolf corrected her pronunciation. Running Bear laughed when Elena mispronounced difficult words, but not in a mean way. Elena taught the boys some Spanish words that her grandmother had taught her. Soon they were all laughing as they tried to pronounce words in each other's languages. The language lessons helped pass time and made them feel less scared. In the afternoon, Elena heard a new sound outside. It was not the rushing water or wind. It sounded like aircraft engines in the distance. Elena ran to the cave entrance and looked up at the sky through the rain clouds. She saw 3 flying vehicles searching the flooded valley. They were rescue craft from the colony flying in a search pattern. Elena waved her arms and shouted, but the aircraft were too far away to see her. "Help is coming," Elena told the boys excitedly. "Rescue teams are looking for us." Little Wolf and Running Bear came to the cave entrance and watched the aircraft disappear over the next hill. Their faces showed hope for the first time since the flood began. But as the day continued, no rescue teams appeared. The aircraft had been searching in the wrong area. Elena realized they might not be found for several more days. She looked at their remaining food and water and felt worried. That evening, as they sat around their small fire, Elena made a difficult decision. They could not wait for rescue much longer. Their supplies were running low and the cave was not a good long-term shelter. Tomorrow, if the weather cleared, they would have to try to reach higher ground on their own. Elena began planning their escape route. She had seen hills to the east that were definitely above the flood line. If they could build a raft or find another way across the water, they might reach safety. But the journey would be dangerous, especially with an injured child. Little Wolf seemed to understand Elena's concerns without her saying anything. "We trust you," he said simply. "You saved us from the island. You will find a way to get us home." Elena looked at the 2 boys who had placed their faith in her. Little Wolf with his serious 8-year-old eyes and Running Bear who smiled despite their desperate situation. She had to find a way to get them to safety. These children were depending on her and she would not let them down. Outside the cave, the floodwaters continued to rush past, carrying trees and debris toward the distant ocean. Elena listened to the sound of the river and tried to think of a plan that would get all 3 of them to safety. Tomorrow they would have to leave the cave and trust their lives to whatever plan she could devise. Running Bear said something in Sioux and pointed toward the back of the cave. Elena looked where he pointed and saw that he had arranged some small stones in a pattern. Little Wolf explained that his brother was making a prayer to the spirits asking them to guide Elena and keep them all safe. Elena felt touched by the boys' faith in her. She hoped she could live up to their trust and find a way home. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the command center at Central Colony and studied the flood maps on the large screen. Red zones showed areas completely underwater. Yellow zones showed areas that might flood soon. The entire Cheyenne River Valley was solid red. Nobody could survive down there now. Any word from Research Station 7? Jake asked his communications officer. Last contact was 18 hours ago, the officer replied. Dr. Rodriguez reported she was evacuating, but we lost her signal after that. Her emergency beacon went dead 6 hours ago. Jake frowned as he looked at the map. Elena Rodriguez was a good scientist and careful person. She would not take unnecessary risks. But something had gone wrong during her evacuation. The command center doors opened and Daniel Standing Horse walked in. The tall Sioux man wore the uniform of the Colonial Defense Force with lieutenant bars on his collar. His face showed the controlled worry of a professional soldier dealing with a personal crisis. Captain Morrison, Daniel said, I need to join the search for Dr. Rodriguez. Jake knew why Daniel was really here. Your brothers were supposed to evacuate with the other children from the preserve. Are they missing too? Daniel nodded. Little Wolf and Running Bear were not on the evacuation transport. The other children said they were playing by the river when the boats left. I think they got left behind. Jake studied the flood maps again. If 2 children were trapped somewhere in that red zone, they were probably dead already, but he could not say that to Daniel. The man was a decorated soldier who had served the colony well. The search teams cannot fly in this weather, Jake said. The storm is too dangerous. We will start looking as soon as conditions improve. Daniel clenched his fists. My brothers could be trapped somewhere. Every hour we wait makes their chances worse. Jake understood Daniel's frustration. If his own family was missing, he would want to search too. But sending rescue teams into the storm would only create more casualties. I am sorry, Lieutenant, Jake said. I cannot risk more lives until the weather clears. That is an order. Daniel saluted stiffly and left the command center. Jake watched him go and felt bad about the decision. But a commander had to think about all his people, not just the missing ones. 6 hours later, the storm finally began to weaken. Jake immediately ordered 3 search aircraft to begin looking for survivors. The pilots were volunteers who knew the mission was dangerous. Floodwaters were still rising and the weather remained unpredictable. Daniel Standing Horse stood in the hangar bay as the search teams prepared their aircraft. He had changed from his military uniform into civilian clothes. In his backpack, he carried survival gear and traditional Sioux medicine supplies. I want to go with the search team, Daniel told the lead pilot. The pilot shook his head. Sorry, Lieutenant. Orders are military personnel only on this mission. Daniel had expected this answer. He waited until the search aircraft took off and then walked to the civilian flight area. Several colonists owned small flying vehicles for personal use. Daniel found what he was looking for in Hangar 12. The hover bike belonged to Pete Adams, who worked in the colony's maintenance department. Pete was a friend who had borrowed Sioux hunting guides many times. Daniel found Pete in the maintenance shop. I need to borrow your hover bike, Daniel said without introduction. Pete looked up from the engine he was repairing. For what? My brothers are missing in the flood zone. I have to look for them. Pete wiped grease from his hands and stood up. He was a short, stocky man with kind eyes. The flood zone is off limits. Too dangerous. My brothers are 8 and 10 years old, Daniel said. If they are alive, they will not survive much longer without help. Pete looked at Daniel's determined face and made his decision. Take the bike, but be careful out there. The flood has changed everything. You might not recognize landmarks. Daniel thanked Pete and went to the hover bike. The small vehicle was designed for 1 person, but had room for supplies. Daniel loaded his backpack and some emergency equipment. He also took a powerful spotlight for searching in dark areas. The hover bike lifted off quietly. Daniel flew low to avoid the colony's air traffic control. He did not want anyone to stop him before he reached the search area. Within minutes, he was flying over the flooded valley. The sight below shocked Daniel even though he had seen the maps. Water covered everything. Trees that had stood for decades were now just dark shapes under brown floodwater. Buildings were completely submerged. The landscape looked like an alien world. Daniel flew toward the area where Research Station 7 had been located. If Dr. Rodriguez had tried to evacuate, she might have encountered his brothers near there. The station itself was underwater, but Daniel could see some of the taller equipment still poking above the surface. Daniel circled the area and used his spotlight to search for any signs of survivors. He saw debris floating everywhere, but no people. He tried his radio to contact the official search teams but got only static. The flood had damaged communication towers throughout the valley. As Daniel searched, he thought about his brothers. Little Wolf was responsible for his age, but he was still just 8 years old. Running Bear was only 10, but he was the more adventurous of the two boys. Both were good swimmers, but the floodwater was too dangerous for anyone. Daniel followed the river downstream looking for high ground where survivors might take shelter. He found several small hills that were still above water, but saw no signs of people. His fuel gauge showed he had used half his supply. Soon he would have to return to the colony. Then Daniel saw something that made him stop the hoverbike and look more carefully. On a hillside about 2 miles downstream from the research station, he spotted what looked like smoke rising from the trees. It was just a thin wisp, but it was definitely smoke. Daniel flew toward the smoke source. As he got closer, he could see it was coming from a cave entrance partway up a steep hill. Someone had made a fire inside the cave. It could be his brothers or other survivors. Daniel tried to land the hoverbike on the hillside, but the ground was too steep and rocky. He found a flat area at the bottom of the hill near the floodwater. The bike's landing gear sank into soft mud but held firm. Daniel climbed up the hillside toward the cave. The slope was treacherous and slippery from the rain. Several times he almost fell back down to the bottom. Sharp rocks cut his hands as he pulled himself up. When Daniel reached the cave entrance, he called out softly, "Hello, is anyone in there?" A woman's voice answered from inside the cave. "Who is there? Are you with the rescue team?" Daniel recognized the voice as Dr. Elena Rodriguez. His heart raced as he realized she might have his brothers with her. "This is Lieutenant Daniel Standing Horse. Are there 2 Sioux boys with you?" Elena appeared at the cave entrance and smiled with relief when she saw Daniel. "Little Wolf and Running Bear are here. They are safe, but we have been trapped for 2 days." Daniel felt overwhelming relief flood through him. His brothers were alive. He climbed into the cave and saw Little Wolf and Running Bear sitting by a small fire. Both boys looked tired and hungry but uninjured. "Daniel." Little Wolf cried out and ran to hug his older brother. Running, Bear also ran to Daniel and spoke, rapidly in Sioux. He was telling Daniel about their adventure and how Elena had saved them from the flood. Daniel hugged both boys tightly and spoke to them in their native language. Then he turned to Elena, who was watching the reunion with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," Daniel said simply. "You saved my brothers' lives." Elena shook her head. "They were very brave. We all helped each other survive." Daniel looked around the cave and saw how Elena had organized their shelter. She had kept a fire burning, rationed their supplies carefully, and treated Running Bear's injured leg. She had done everything right to keep the boys alive. "Can your hover bike carry all of us?" Elena asked. Daniel thought about the small vehicle waiting at the bottom of the hill. "It will be crowded, but yes, we can make it work." Daniel helped pack up their few supplies while Elena put out the fire. Little Wolf and Running Bear were excited to finally leave the cave, but also sad to abandon the shelter that had kept them safe. The climb down the hillside was even more difficult than the climb up. Daniel went first to steady the boys when they slipped. Elena came last to make sure no one fell behind. Several times they all nearly tumbled down the steep slope. When they reached the hoverbike, Daniel saw immediately that fitting 4 people would be challenging. The vehicle was designed for 1 person with a small amount of cargo space. But Daniel was determined to get everyone to safety in one trip. Elena and the boys squeezed together in the passenger area, while Daniel took the pilot seat. The hoverbike's engines strained under the extra weight, but lifted off successfully. Daniel flew slowly and carefully back toward the colony. As they approached the colony airspace, Daniel's radio crackled to life. It was Captain Morrison asking for his location and status. Daniel reported that he had found Dr. Rodriguez and the missing children. He could hear the relief in Morrison's voice. The hoverbike landed at the Colony Medical Center, where doctors were waiting to examine Elena and the boys. As they climbed out of the crowded vehicle, Daniel looked at Elena with new respect. This woman had risked her life to save 2 children she barely knew. She had kept them alive for 2 days, in dangerous conditions. Daniel realized his opinion of outsiders had been too harsh. Some people earned respect through Elena woke up in the Colony Medical Center feeling more rested than she had in days. The soft bed and warm blankets were a welcome change from the cold cave floor. Through the window she could see that the floodwaters were finally starting to recede. The worst of the disaster was over. A nurse brought Elena breakfast and told her the boys were doing well. Little Wolf and Running Bear had spent the night in the children's ward, but would be released that morning. Their injuries were minor and they had recovered quickly from their ordeal. Dr. Martinez, the chief medical officer, came to check on Elena before releasing her. "You have some bruises and cuts, but nothing serious," he said. "The boys told me you kept them safe for 2 days. That was good work." Elena felt embarrassed by the praise. "I just did what anyone would do." Dr. Martinez shook his head. "Not everyone would risk their life for children they barely knew. You should be proud of what you did." Elena was getting dressed when Little Wolf and Running Bear appeared in her doorway. Both boys wore clean clothes and had big smiles on their faces. Running Bear's leg was properly bandaged and he was walking without difficulty. "Elena," Little Wolf said excitedly, "Daniel says we can go home today. Will you come visit us at the preserve?" Elena smiled at the boys' enthusiasm. "I would like that very much." Running Bear spoke in Sioux and Little Wolf translated. "Running Bear says our grandmother wants to meet you. She wants to thank you for saving us." Elena felt touched by the invitation. She had always wanted to learn more about Sioux culture, but had never found a way to connect with the community. Perhaps this experience had opened a door to new friendships. Daniel appeared behind the boys wearing his military uniform. He looked official and serious again after the emotional reunion of the previous day. "Dr. Rodriguez, I wanted to speak with you before we return to the preserve." Elena followed Daniel to a quiet corner of the hospital lobby while the boys waited nearby. Daniel seemed to be struggling with something he wanted to say. "I owe you an apology," Daniel said finally. "I have not been fair to outsiders like you. I thought all colonists only cared about taking things from our land. But you proved me wrong." Elena was surprised by Daniel's words. "You do not owe me any apology. You were protecting your people and your culture." "I understand that," Daniel shook his head. "Protecting is one thing. Prejudging is another. You risked everything for my brothers without thinking about what you might gain. That showed me real character." Elena looked at Little Wolf and Running Bear who were playing a quiet game while they waited. "Your brothers are special boys. They were brave and helped me just as much as I helped them." Daniel smiled for the first time since Elena had met him. "They like you very much. Little Wolf has been telling everyone at the preserve about the brave scientist who saved them from the flood." A few hours later, Elena was cleared to leave the medical center. Daniel offered to drive her back to her temporary quarters at the colony, but Elena asked if she could visit the preserve first. She wanted to see where the boys lived and meet their family. The drive to the Lakota Preserve took 30 minutes through areas that were still drying out from the flood. Elena could see the high water marks on trees and buildings. The disaster had affected everyone in the valley, but the Sioux community had suffered less because their homes were built on higher ground. The preserve was larger than Elena had expected. Traditional Sioux dwellings mixed with modern buildings made from local materials. Gardens grew between the houses where families raised corn, beans and squash using ancient farming, methods adapted to New Dakota soil. Daniel stopped the vehicle in front of a modest house with solar panels on the roof and traditional Sioux decorations around the door. Little Wolf and Running Bear jumped out and ran inside calling for their parents. Elena followed Daniel inside and was introduced to the boys' parents. Joseph Standing Horse was a teacher at the preserve school. He was younger than Elena had expected, with kind eyes like his son's. Mary Standing Horse was a small, energetic woman who grew medicinal plants in the family garden. "Dr. Rodriguez," Mary said warmly, "our boys told us everything you did for them. You are welcome in our home always." Elena felt moved by the family's hospitality. She sat at their kitchen table and shared a meal of traditional foods mixed with vegetables grown on New Dakota. The conversation was relaxed and friendly, with Little Wolf and Running Bear adding excited details about their adventure. After lunch, Mary took Elena to see her garden where she grew healing plants using traditional Sioux knowledge. Elena was fascinated by how Mary had adapted earth plants to grow in New Dakota's different soil and climate. "Running Bear has a gift for understanding plants," Mary said proudly. "He learns quickly which ones help with different illnesses." Elena looked at Running Bear, who was examining a flowering bush with serious concentration. "Maybe he will become a scientist like me someday." Mary smiled. "Or maybe you will learn our plant medicine and become more like us." That evening, the preserve held a small celebration to welcome the boys home safely. Families gathered in the community center to share food and stories. Elena was introduced to many people who thanked her for saving Little Wolf and Running Bear. An elderly woman named Grandmother Wilson approached Elena during the celebration. She was the preserve's oldest resident and most respected elder. Everyone quieted when she began to speak. "Young woman," Grandmother Wilson said in accented English, "you have shown great courage. But more than courage, you have shown love for children who were not your own. This is the sign of a true warrior spirit." Elena felt overwhelmed by the old woman's words. "I just helped when help was needed." Grandmother Wilson smiled. "That is exactly what a warrior does." Chief White Eagle, the preserve's elected leader, also spoke to Elena that evening. He was a dignified man in his 60s who had led the community since they arrived on New Dakota. "Dr. Rodriguez," the chief said, "your actions during the flood have been reported to our tribal council. We would like to discuss honoring you in our traditional way if you would accept such an honor." Elena was not sure what this meant, but she felt honored to be considered. "I would be grateful for any recognition from your community." Chief White Eagle nodded seriously. "We will speak more about this in the coming days." As the evening ended, Elena prepared to return to the colony. Daniel offered to drive her again, but Little Wolf and Running Bear begged her to stay overnight. Their parents added their invitation, and Elena found herself agreeing to sleep on the family's couch. That night, Elena lay awake thinking about the events of the past few days. She had come to New Dakota to study plants but had discovered something more valuable. She had found a community that valued courage, family, and helping others. These were values she shared even though she had not grown up with Sioux traditions. Elena also thought about Daniel and how his attitude toward her had changed. She realized she had prejudged him too. She had assumed he disliked her because she was an outsider when really, he was just protecting his family and culture from people who might not respect them. The next morning, Elena woke to the smell of breakfast cooking. Mary was making traditional cornbread and eggs from the family's chickens. Little Wolf and Running Bear were already dressed and playing outside in the garden. Elena joined the family for breakfast and felt like she belonged with them. The conversation was comfortable and natural. She told them about her research and they shared stories about life on the preserve. "Will you come back to visit us often?" Little Wolf asked as Elena prepared to leave. "I hope so," Elena said. "I would like to learn more about your plants and traditions." Running Bear ran to Elena and hugged her legs. He spoke in Sioux and Little Wolf translated. "Running Bear says you are part of our family now." Elena felt tears in her eyes as she hugged the young boy back. "Tell him I feel the same way." Daniel drove Elena back to the colony that morning. During the drive, they talked about their work and their different perspectives on life in the valley. Elena realized she had made not just two young friends, but possibly an older friend as well. "The tribal council will meet about your honor ceremony in 3 days," Daniel told Elena as they reached the colony. "I hope you will accept whatever they decide to offer you." Elena looked back toward the preserve where smoke was rising from morning cooking fires. She felt drawn to that community in a way she had never expected. "I will be honored by whatever they decide." Elena spent the next 3 days thinking about the boys and their family. She found it hard to concentrate on her research because her mind kept returning to the warm welcome she had received at the preserve. She had found something on New Dakota that she had not known she was looking for. She had found a place where she belonged. When Daniel came to get her for the tribal council meeting, Elena was nervous but excited. She had no idea what kind of honor the council might offer, but she knew it would be meaningful. The Sioux did not give recognition lightly. Whatever they decided to do would come from the heart. 3 days after the flood, Elena stood outside the tribal council building at the Lakota Preserve. The building was made from local stone and wood with traditional Sioux designs carved into the entrance. Daniel walked beside her wearing ceremonial clothing instead of his military uniform. "Are you nervous?" Daniel asked as they approached the entrance. Elena nodded. "I do not know what to expect. I have never been to a Sioux ceremony before." "Just be yourself," Daniel said.
"The council wants to honor you for what you did."
"Let them do that." Inside the building, Elena saw about 20 people sitting in a circle. She recognized Chief White Eagle and Grandmother Wilson along with other preserve elders. Little Wolf and Running Bear sat with their parents near the front. Both boys smiled and waved when they saw Elena. Chief White Eagle stood and gestured for Elena to sit in a place of honor near the center of the circle. Elena felt all eyes on her as she took the seat. The atmosphere was solemn but welcoming. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Chief White Eagle, began in a formal voice. You have been called before this council to receive recognition for your actions during the Great Flood. You risked your life to save two children of our community without thought of reward or recognition. Elena listened as the chief described her rescue of Little Wolf and Running Bear. Hearing the story from his perspective made Elena realize how dangerous their situation had really been. At the time, she had been too focused on survival to think about the risks. The council has discussed what honor would be appropriate for someone who showed such courage and selflessness. Chief White Eagle continued, "We have decided to offer you something that has never been given to an outsider before." Elena felt her heart beating faster. She had no idea what the chief meant, but she could see this was very important to everyone in the room. Grandmother Wilson stood slowly with the help of a walking stick. Despite her age, her voice was strong and clear. "In our tradition, we have ceremonies for adopting new members into our tribe. Usually this honor is only given to those born Sioux or those who marry into Sioux families." Elena listened carefully as the old woman continued. "But sometimes we meet a person whose spirit shows they already belong with us even though they were born elsewhere. Your actions during the flood showed us that you have the heart of a Sioux warrior woman." Little Wolf jumped up from his seat and ran to Elena. "Will you be our sister?" he asked excitedly. Elena looked around the circle of faces. Everyone was watching her with expressions of hope and welcome. Elena felt overwhelmed by their offer. These people were asking her to become part of their family and community. "I am honored by your offer," Elena said carefully, "but I want to be sure I understand what this means. I do not want to accept something I cannot properly fulfill." Chief White Eagle smiled approvingly. "That question shows wisdom. Becoming adopted into our tribe means you would be welcomed as a full member of our community. You would have the same rights and responsibilities as anyone born Sioux. You would also be expected to learn our ways and support our traditions." Elena thought about what the chief was saying. She would become part of a community that valued family, courage, and respect for nature. These were values she already believed in, but she would also need to learn new customs and ways of thinking. "What about my work as a scientist?" Elena asked. "I came to New Dakota to study plants and animals." Daniel spoke up from his place in the circle. "Our community needs people with scientific knowledge. You could continue your research while also learning our traditional plant medicine. Running Bear has already shown interest in working with you." Elena looked at Running Bear, who nodded enthusiastically. The idea of combining her scientific training with traditional Sioux knowledge appealed to her. She could learn new ways of understanding the natural world. "If I accept this honor, what would my name be?" Elena asked. Grandmother Wilson walked slowly to Elena carrying a beautiful beaded necklace. "We have chosen the name Braveheart Woman because you showed great courage in saving our children. This name honors both your bravery and your caring spirit." Elena felt tears in her eyes as the old woman placed the necklace around her neck. The beadwork was intricate and beautiful with patterns that told stories in traditional Sioux symbols. "I accept your offer with gratitude and humility," Elena said. "I promise to learn your ways and be worthy of the trust you are placing in me." The entire circle erupted in celebration. People came forward to hug Elena and welcome her to the community. Little Wolf and Running Bear were particularly excited to have Elena as their new sister. Mary Standing Horse approached Elena with tears of joy in her eyes. "You saved my boys and now you are my daughter too," she said as she hugged Elena tightly. Joseph Standing Horse also welcomed Elena warmly. "Our family is honored to have you as a sister. Little Wolf and Running Bear have talked about nothing but you for 3 days." The ceremony continued with traditional songs and dances. Elena watched everything with fascination, trying to absorb the meanings behind the rituals. She realized she had much to learn about her new culture but felt excited about the journey ahead. Chief White Eagle presented Elena with several gifts, including traditional clothing and books about Sioux history and customs. "These will help you learn our ways," he explained. "But the most important lessons come from living with the community and participating in daily life." Elena spent the rest of the evening meeting her new extended family. Every person at the preserve was now considered her relative in some way. She learned about their work, their interests, and their hopes for the future of the community. Grandmother Wilson pulled Elena aside during the celebration. "I want to give you some advice about your new life," the old woman said. "Being Sioux is not just about ceremonies and traditions. It is about how you treat other people every day. It is about putting the good of the community before your own desires. Elena listened carefully to the elder's words. I understand. I want to be worthy of this honor. You have already proven your worth, Grandmother Wilson said. Now you just need to live it every day. Later that evening, Elena walked through the preserve with Daniel, who was showing her around her new home. They stopped at a small house near the edge of the community. This house belongs to the community, Daniel explained. It is available for you to live in if you want to move from the colony housing. Elena looked at the modest but comfortable house. It had a garden space where she could grow plants for her research. The location would let her easily walk to the school where she might teach children about science. I would like to live here, Elena said. It feels right, Daniel smiled. I thought you might like it. The house has been empty for 2 years waiting for the right person. Elena realized that everything was falling into place perfectly. She had a new family, a new home, and a chance to combine her scientific work with traditional knowledge. The flood that had seemed like a disaster was turning into the best thing that had ever happened to her. As they walked back toward the main part of the preserve, Elena saw Little Wolf and Running Bear playing in the moonlight with other children. When they saw Elena, they ran to her calling sister in both English and Sioux. Elena hugged both boys and felt a deep sense of belonging. 3 days ago, she had been a lonely scientist living at the edge of someone else's community. Now she was Braveheart Woman, a full member of the Lakota Preserve with family and friends who cared about her. Tomorrow, we start teaching you to speak Sioux properly, Little Wolf announced. Running Bear says your pronunciation is terrible. Elena laughed as Running Bear nodded seriously in agreement. I guess I have a lot to learn. We will teach you everything, Running Bear said in his careful English. Sisters help each other. Elena looked up at the 2 moons of New Dakota shining in the clear sky. The same moons that had caused the flood were now beautiful again, lighting her path to a new life. Sometimes the most dangerous events led to the most wonderful outcomes. Elena knew that accepting adoption into the Sioux community was just the beginning. She would need to prove herself worthy of their trust through her actions in the months and years ahead, but she felt confident that she had found where she belonged. As Elena walked back to the Standing Horse family home where she would stay until her own house was ready, she thought about how much her life had changed. A week ago, she had been studying plants alone. Now she was part of a community that valued knowledge, wisdom, and caring for others. Elena fell asleep that night in the Standing Horse family guest room, listening to the sounds of her new community settling down for the night. She dreamed of learning traditional plant medicine and teaching Sioux children about science. She dreamed of a future where she truly belonged. Elena woke before dawn in her new house at the Lakota Preserve. Today was the formal adoption ceremony that would officially make her a member of the Sioux tribe. She had spent 2 weeks learning basic Sioux customs and language from the Standing Horse family and other community members. Elena looked at the traditional dress hanging in her closet. Mary Standing Horse had spent days making the beautiful garment with intricate beadwork and traditional patterns. Elena felt honored to wear something made with such care and skill. As Elena prepared for the ceremony, she thought about how much her life had changed. 2 weeks ago, she had been a solitary scientist. Now she was about to become Braveheart Woman, a full member of a community that valued courage, family, and wisdom above individual achievement. Little Wolf and Running Bear arrived at Elena's house just as she finished getting dressed. Both boys wore their best traditional clothing and had painted designs on their faces for the ceremony. You look like a real Sioux woman, Little Wolf said approvingly as he examined Elena's appearance. Running Bear nodded and said something in Sioux. Over the past 2 weeks, Elena had learned enough of the language to understand basic conversations. Running Bear was saying she looked beautiful and proud. Are you ready for the ceremony? Little Wolf asked. Elena took a deep breath. I am nervous but excited. This is the most important day of my life. Daniel arrived to escort Elena to the ceremonial grounds. He wore the traditional clothing of a Sioux warrior with feathers in his hair and war paint on his face. Elena had never seen him look so serious and dignified. Today you become my sister in the eyes of our people and the spirits, Daniel said formally. Are you prepared to accept the responsibilities that come with this honor? Elena had practiced her response in Sioux. I am prepared to live as a member of the people and to protect our traditions and our children. Daniel smiled with approval. Then let us go. The community is waiting. The ceremonial grounds were located at the center of the preserve in a natural amphitheater surrounded by trees. Elena saw that the entire community had gathered for the ceremony. Adults sat in a large circle while children sat in front where they could see everything clearly. Chief White Eagle stood in the center of the circle wearing the full regalia of a tribal leader. His headdress contained eagle feathers that had been blessed in traditional ceremonies. His presence commanded respect from everyone present. "Today we gather to welcome a new daughter into our tribe," Chief White Eagle announced in both Sioux and English. Dr. Elena Rodriguez has shown through her actions that she possesses the spirit of a Sioux warrior woman. She risked her life to save our children without thought of personal gain. Elena walked to the center of the circle and stood facing the chief. She had memorized the words she needed to say, but her heart was beating so fast she worried she might forget them. Grandmother Wilson came forward carrying a sacred pipe that had belonged to the tribe for many generations. The old woman moved slowly but with great dignity as she prepared to begin the adoption ritual. "Spirits of the four directions," Grandmother Wilson called out, "we ask you to witness this ceremony and bless our new daughter with wisdom, courage, and long life." Elena felt the solemnity of the moment as the elder called upon spiritual forces to witness her adoption. Even though she had not grown up with these beliefs, she could feel the power and meaning behind the ancient words. Daniel stepped forward to speak on Elena's behalf. "I stand before you as witness to this woman's character. When my brothers were in deadly danger, she did not hesitate to risk her own life to save them. She stayed with them when she could have escaped to safety. She cared for them as if they were her own children." Elena saw Little Wolf and Running Bear sitting with their parents. Both boys were watching the ceremony with intense concentration. Elena knew that her actions during the flood had brought her to this moment, but now she needed to prove worthy of the honor being given to her. Elena Rodriguez, Chief White Eagle, said, "Do you come before us freely seeking to join our tribe and accept our ways as your own?" "I do," Elena replied in Sioux. "Do you promise to protect the children of our tribe as you protected Little Wolf and Running Bear?" "I promise," Elena said. "Do you promise to learn our traditions and pass them on to future generations?" "I promise." "Do you promise to put the good of the community before your own desires?" Elena paused for a moment, thinking about what this promise really meant. She was agreeing to change her entire way of life to become part of something larger than herself. "I promise," Elena said with conviction. Chief White Eagle nodded approvingly and gestured for Grandmother Wilson to continue the ceremony. The old woman approached Elena carrying a bowl of sacred herbs that would be burned as part of the ritual. "Breathe in the smoke and let it carry your old life away," Grandmother Wilson instructed. "When the smoke clears, you will be reborn as Braveheart Woman, daughter of the Lakota people." Elena breathed in the sweet-smelling smoke and felt a sense of transformation washing over her. She was leaving behind her old identity as a lonely scientist and embracing a new life as a member of a caring community. Mary standing. Horse came forward carrying the special necklace that would mark Elena as an adopted member of the tribe. The necklace had been made by the women of the community working together. Each bead told part of the story of Elena's rescue of the children. "Wear this with pride," Mary said as she placed the necklace around Elena's neck. "It shows that you are one of us now." Elena felt the weight of the necklace and understood that it represented not just honor, but responsibility. She was now accountable to the entire community for her actions and decisions. Joseph Standing Horse presented Elena with a traditional name sign that would hang outside her house. The sign was carved from local wood and painted with symbols that told the story of how she earned her new name. "From this day forward, you are known as Braveheart Woman," Joseph announced. "May you live up to the courage shown in your name." The formal ceremony concluded with traditional songs and dances that celebrated Elena's adoption into the tribe. Everyone in the community came forward to welcome her as a sister, daughter, or aunt, depending on their relationship to her new family. Elena was overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance shown by her new relatives. Children who had been shy around her before now ran up to hug her and call her aunt. Adults who had kept their distance now treated her as a family member. Little Wolf and Running Bear were particularly excited about the ceremony. They had been telling everyone for weeks that Elena was their sister, and now it was officially true. "Now you have to come to all our family gatherings," Little Wolf informed Elena seriously, "and you have to help us with our homework." Elena laughed and agreed to both conditions. She was looking forward to being part of a large, extended family after years of living alone. As the celebration continued, Elena found herself talking with community members about their hopes and concerns for the future. She learned about challenges facing the preserve and ways her scientific knowledge might help solve problems. Dr. Green, the preserve's medical officer, told Elena about his interest in combining traditional plant medicine with modern medical techniques. Your research on New Dakota's plants could help us develop better treatments for common illnesses, he explained. Elena was excited by the possibility of making her scientific work more relevant to the daily lives of her new community. She had always believed that knowledge should be used to help people, not just satisfy curiosity. Chief White Eagle approached Elena as the ceremony was winding down. Tomorrow your new life begins, he said. But remember that becoming Sioux is not something you achieve once and then forget. It is something you must choose to live every day. Elena understood the chief's meaning. The ceremony was important, but what mattered more was how she conducted herself in the weeks, months, and years ahead. I will not forget, Elena promised. I want to be worthy of the trust you have shown me. You already are, Chief White Eagle replied. Now you just need to keep proving it. As evening approached, Elena stood with Daniel at the edge of the ceremonial grounds, watching the community clean up from the day's celebration. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction and belonging that she had never experienced before. How do you feel? Daniel asked. Elena thought for a moment before answering. Complete, she said finally. For the first time in my life, I feel like I am exactly where I belong. Daniel nodded with understanding. That is how you know you have found your true family. Elena looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere among those stars was Earth, where she had been born. But this was home now. This community, these people, this way of life felt more real and meaningful than anything she had left behind. Elena walked back to her house accompanied by Little Wolf and Running Bear, who had appointed themselves as her permanent escorts. As she prepared for sleep, Elena reflected on the day's events and felt grateful for the flood that had brought her to this moment. Sometimes the worst disasters led to the best outcomes. Elena had lost her old life but gained something far more valuable. She had found a family and a community where she truly belonged.